about 18 months ago, I invested in one of the more expensive sergers on the domestic market, namely the BabyLock Imagine. And now I've used it enough to feel confident about making a thorough review, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So BabyLock is obviously one of the more upscale brands, and this was my first experience using the BabyLock brand, and I was recommended the Imagine from several people because they said that the stitching is so beautiful, and it truly is. And there are a couple of features that the BabyLock has that is perhaps not standard on more sort of mid-range sergers. So I'm going to first talk about those. And the first one that is really nice to have is the auto threading system, or the air threading, I think it's the brand name that they use. So basically that means that both the looper threads are threaded by pushing air, and that makes them automatically going through all the looper thread guides and eyes, which makes threading so much easier. You have to thread the first couple of thread guides until you reach these two slots, and then you just push a lever and then it sort of pushes through all the other ways. It's basically, it feels like magic. It's unbelievable nice, and I had not have hardly any issues with it not working, and the few times I haven't made it work, it's always been because I have been sloppy with the setup, because it's really important, because you have to thread it manually up to here. You need to make sure that there's about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters, I think, of thread in the slot before you start pushing the lever here to pull it through all the rest of the guide. So that's really important to know. So that is feature number one. That is, I don't think it's unique perhaps for BabyLock, but it's definitely not something that you will find on most sergers. And the second feature that makes it stand out is that it has auto tension. And what that means is that there is no tension dials on the serger. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I would say it depends, to be honest. The threading works beautifully, and compared to my older Fuff, which was the serger that I had before this one, it provides consistently much more beautiful stitching, and even if I use a thicker thread such as woolly nylon, the stitching still comes out beautifully. But there's one instance where I really miss those tension dials, and that is when I do flat locked seams. You know, seam that you can pull apart to create a flat seam so the edges are butted against each other, and that's a great feature to do when you're working on knits. But you need to tamper with, especially with the looper setting there, and the needle setting as well, to make sure that it actually lies flat when pulled apart. And because of the auto tension, I have not been able to achieve that flat seam on all the fabrics. Thinner knit, it works beautifully, but when it comes thicker, the range isn't good enough. When I say it's auto tension, it's not 100% true. There is actually a screw here where you can alter to increase or decrease the tension, but from my understanding, it does that on all the tension disc at once. But because usually you want to increase perhaps the tension on the needles and decrease on the looper, and this sort of doesn't give that fine tuning. This is what I would call perhaps the major drawback of this serger, but it's, when you see all the other advantages, I'm not feeling that I miss it too much. It's just it all depends if you're very fond of using the flatlock seam, as I am, but I think most people don't really use it much, so it's not actually an issue, I would think, for a lot of people when they're using the serger. And the third thing that makes the BabyLock unique and also really nice to use is that it has an automatic threader. Now, threading through the eye of the needle, that's not always easy, especially when one is getting older, and some of those tools that you can get are not always that great to use. But this machine actually has a built-in threading system, and it's super easy to use, and you just have to move the hand wheel to the right position and also tell the machine if you want to thread the left or the right needle, and you do that by switching these back and forth. And that's all you have to do. You just then pull this little lever, and that just pulls the thread automatically back. Again, that combined with the automatic threading of the looper, that just makes serging so much easier and less, exhausting, especially for persons like me who is pretty much I like to have my threads to match the fabric, which means that it usually means a lot of rethreading when I'm using my serger. So these two things really saves a lot of time and also perhaps a mental pain. And as for the general feel of this machine, I was actually a little bit surprised when I went to the store and tested it to see if it was a machine that I would be worth considering, because it feels kind of light and toyish. I mean, it's not light, it's quite sturdy, but it's so tiny and little. It's hard to explain. It feels a little bit like a doll machine, but don't let the appearance fool you. Just because it isn't the biggest serger out there doesn't mean it's not powerful, because it also suits really well over a thicker layer of fabrics. As for the stitches I use, apart from the flatlock, I use a lot of the 3-thread narrow and wide. Both those are beautiful done. And also, of course, I do love how nice it does roll hem. So if you're sewing a lot with lightweight fabrics such as silk and rayon cut on the bias particular, and you've struggled getting a nice hem, because usually it's quite hard to do a rolled seam on a regular sewing machine with those presser foot attachment. Using this rolled hem theatre instead, it's absolutely fantastic. It provides the most beautiful rolled hem, but you have to be sure that you set it up properly. And to change the different stitches, the primary way you do that is switching on this knob A, B, C, D. And apart from the manual, it also has a quick guide, which I think is super useful, so you don't have to go through all the, because what I would like to have seen is a diagram of all the regular stitches on the inside of the looper cover, but there's no such thing on this machine. Instead you have to use the quick guide, but this have the most common stitches that you will need to use. So I use this much more than I do the actual manual. So that's good to know. Also, another good thing that you need to know about the BabyLock that I discovered the hard way, and I'm sure other people as well, is that you have to really look at the description carefully, because on some stitches, such as the flatlock, you don't thread the needle thread through the thread guide of the needle. Instead, you thread the needle thread through the looper seam guide and tension disc for the first part here. And you can see that if you look closely at the technical illustrations, but it's not easy to spot, so you probably end up thinking intuitive that you should thread it all the way through the needle tension disc, but you shouldn't. So those are the sort of nuances that you need to be mindful of when you're using the BabyLock, that is a bit different from the other sergers that I've tried over the years that are a bit more straightforward. So there are a couple of things that this machine differs. I find that the recommended settings usually works really well. I don't find that I have to tamper too much with the cutting width or the stitch length or the differential feed. As I said, the stitching looks really well without much of a tampering. So if you are frustrated with your regular serger and are looking for a more reliable piece of equipment, then I can definitely recommend the BabyLock. That said, in Sweden I think it's almost twice as expensive as the sort of regular domestic serger, so that's something to consider. And it's hard for me to say if it's 100% better. I don't think it's 100% better. I think it's more like 45% better, if you know what I mean. It's a much better serger than the ones I've tried before, but it's definitely not a magic machine. And I do wish that there was some way of being able to add manual tension as well. So that is my biggest criticism of it. But apart from that, I feel very confident in recommending this machine, and I know that people who have used it and use it a lot are also big fans both of this particular serger and the brand. And if you can find it used, that's definitely an avenue to explore. Then I would say you would definitely get your money's worth. So this was my review of the BabyLock. Now I'm really curious to know if you have any experience with this machine. Please tell me in the comment section. Of course, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer, so please ask away. And if you want to support my work, you can do that on patreon.com/laststitch, where I've got lots of cool stuff waiting for you there. So head over to patreon.com/laststitch if you want to support my work. Anyways, that was all for me today. Please subscribe for weekly sewing videos. Stitch safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!